Now I have Jim Leonard on the phone, and Jim is down in the Florida Keys right now. Jim, how have you been, and are you still heading out to the Midwest?
Yeah, tomorrow morning I'll be getting ready to go, and should be out there by the weekend, and for 6 weeks of storm chasing.
And is there any reason that you were a little bit late heading out there this year?
No, this is about the normal time. I usually the real action, the best photogenic tornadoes usually don't occur until about the second week of May on until about the middle of June.
And are you expecting a good season this year? How was now you were out there last year, correct?
Yeah, last year was a very slow year. May was almost non-existent of severe weather. Then the first 2 weeks of June, it turned around, and luckily I hung around a little long enough, and I got a couple of real good days just before I came back.
Hopefully when you get out there you'll see something, but then again, if it's not busy like last year, that might mean ominous signs for the hurricane season coming up.
Well, it could be that. I've seen just as many active tornado seasons and hurricane seasons, and just, vice versa. I used to think there was a correlation between the activity of one versus the activity of the other, but it doesn't seem to hold much water.
All right, Jim, let's get right to the meat of this here, the hurricane season coming up. What do you think is going to happen this year? Do you think we're going to have just the same kind of season we had last year?
Last year was an extreme event. I don't expect anything that strong. I would expect somewhere in between kind of like 96, 98, 95, kind of in that, average. Nothing, it's going to be well above the average number. Normally we get 11 storms a year. The 16 they're talking about, and counting all the subtropical ones, is probably a pretty good guess. But as far as where they're going to go, it's going to be hard to tell. But La Nina years, we're in a weak La Nina period, and I think the way the pattern usually goes with those, you get a lot of East Coast storms, a lot of on and offshore of the East Coast, a lot less Gulf activity.
Interesting. Well, now what did you think last year after the season ended? Did you think we were going to have that same kind of season, or did you think it'd be less?
Oh, last season there was no way you could have guessed at what it turned out as. 4 Category 5 storms and and 6 major hurricanes in the Gulf. The old rule back in the old days, they say you can't get more than one major hurricane in the Gulf in the same season because it churns up the water. But 2005 kind of threw holes in a lot of those theories.
Well, I think we're going to, to see 4 Category 5s, I think that would be a bit of a stretch. But,
yeah, that's an average typhoon season.
Yeah, I bet you they had reminiscent about the Pacific season when you were looking at all these massive hurricanes out in the Atlantic Basin. And, you and I talked earlier about what the reasons for this are and what... what's causing these hurricanes not only to be powerful, but they're so big. I mean, these look like Pacific systems.
Well,
don't they?
One reason they're so large in size is the sea level pressure anomalies are real low, which helps develop storms. When you get a lot of little tiny storms, not necessarily weak storms, but a lot of tiny storms, that's usually the pressures are kind of high. Like Andrew was a very small, compact storm because it was in a very high pressure environment, but since 95, the pressures have been a lot lower throughout the tropics, and so we're getting these massive storms. And that's more reminiscent of the Western Pacific, where the pressures are even lower yet, all the time.
Jim will be gone. He'll be out in the Midwest. Now, Jim, when do you come back for hurricane season?
Well, the tours ended about the middle of June, and I'm pretty much watching the hurricane season. I'm really watching the tropics even long before now, just trying to see what kind of trends I see going on out there. The season just doesn't magically start on June 1st. There's subtle hints going on all year round of what kind of season we're going to be in for.
Jim, I have a question for you. What do you think about these tours where they're putting people in buses and taking them into hurricanes?
I'm dead against that because when you're in a hurricane, you're in a real dangerous situation. And, let's say somebody gets panicked or something and they want to leave. You can't do that in a hurricane where when you're tornado chasing, you're just watching from the sideline. A hurricane, you're in the storm. You're part of the storm. And if it's a real intense storm, you're running a lot of risk of injury, or even worse.
Yeah, I agree. And here's another thing I believe is going to happen. In the event, and this is just my opinion, it doesn't mean it's going to happen, but in the event that we continue to see hurricanes like we saw last year, and it's only going to be a matter of time before one of these makes landfall in all its glory, you know it, and I know it, that we can see a car flip over in 120-mile-an-hour winds. We saw it in Hurricane Wilma down here last year.
Mm-hmm.
I could envision a chaser or somebody going out for the first time, or, God forbid, one of these tours, and have a wind gust come in between some buildings and lift one of these vehicles and fling it.
Well, one of the problems, some of the tours that are doing it, they have had very little experience in being in a hurricane. That's something you don't just, go out and try after a couple of times. You're really you're putting the people you're taking in a lot of risk, along with yourself.
And not only that, but not speaking of the tours, but individual storm chasers. You know what to do. You've been in this business a long time. You usually head to a parking garage somewhere, or somewhere where you know that the wind isn't going to pick you. But it just sickens me when I see these hurricanes making landfall, and I see the media, and I see some storm chasers leaning into the wind.
Right.
And that people think that that's what a hurricane is.
Right.
And this drives me nuts, because I know that when the winds get up around 70, 80 miles an hour, you can't stand in that.
No, there's some people that are standing in the wind saying they're in 130 miles an hour. You're not going to stand in a 130-mile-an-hour wind. You're going to get blown away and probably be impaled by a 2x4 in the process.
Yeah, I notice in a lot of your videos, and I'm streaming again Jim Leonard's video in the background here on the screen. You do a lot of your filming from inside your vehicle, and I guess you know how to angle your car in a certain direction where if the wind does get strong enough that you can't lift your car up.
Right, you point it into the wind or in the rear to the wind. That's your best bet.
Okay,
and of course be alongside of a building that you know it's not going to come down on you.
And the other issue is you've had windows busted a bunch of times.
Yeah, well, actually twice. In the Hurricane Charlie, again, and Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Charlie in Port Charlotte, and then again Hurricane Katrina when it was coming into Fort Lauderdale that afternoon.
One email here from John, and he's in Gautier, Mississippi. He measured 974 millibars, but the winds were higher than the pressure indicates, guaranteed, he says.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm not sure where that location is. He was probably in the eye wall if he measured a lot higher winds than the pressure gives, because once a storm moves inland, the pressure rises rapidly. And the storm, it takes a while for it to wind down, but the pressure will come up quite a bit. Yeah.
Anyways, we're with Jim Leonard down in the Florida Keys. Jim comes on my show here about once every year, and we talk about the tropics and tornado chasing. And now let's go out to the Midwest temporarily. How do you set up in the Midwest? If you head out there, what state do you usually go to?
Well, we start out in Oklahoma City. That's our base of operation. Then we move around the plains wherever the best situation is coming in. Let's say that afternoon there's a low set up, let's say in southeast Colorado, western Kansas. We try to get out like east or northeast of that low, or just ahead of the dry line and extend south from that low. And if there's a good short wave aloft coming over that area, that sets off the instability, the wind shear, and everything else that we need for severe storms.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have a caller?
Hey, Jim, it's Bill from Virginia.
Bill from Virginia. Okay, then it is working.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Fine. I guess no one wants to chat tonight. That's
and there's usually, I could have 12 or 13 listeners and get a few phone calls. We got 35 people on here right now, so I was just wondering if it was working.
Yeah, I'm just, it's early in the show. I'm hanging back. I'm going to call, but I'm just hanging back and letting people call. You know how it works. But, Jim, I have a question for you. Do you think the size of a hurricane has anything? The pressure may be 940 millibars, which may indicate a Category 4.
Right.
But the size it may take a lower pressure to equal a Category 4 storm if the storm is larger.
Right, yeah. Usually the small diameter storm, let's say a storm with 940 millibars, a small diameter, let's say a real compact hurricane, it could have almost Category 5 winds with a 940 pressure. Where a very large hurricane with a 940 pressure could maybe only have Category 2 winds.
In essence,
that was the case in Katrina when it hit the Gulf Coast. It was borderline 5 pressure, but the winds were only 3 because the eye wall structure had started eroding away right at landfall. It takes a long time for that pressure to rise substantially when it's still over water.
Jim, I have a question for both of you and Bill in Virginia.
Jim,
Bill,
can you turn your volume up, please?
All right, let me. Do you hear me?
Much better, thank you.
Okay. The question was, did you see that post in the message board today from the Baltimore Sun about the potential storm surge up in the Chesapeake Bay area?
I'm sorry, I've been studying, but I'll make sure I'll look at that.
Okay, well, it says that it's going to be much higher than they had originally, the slosh models had originally anticipated, and that the surge could go much further than what Isabel produced if they had a Category 3 or 4 head in there.
Of course.
And my question for you is, do you... you and I have talked about the fact that you could have a high surge in that area, but as far as Jim is concerned, Jim, first of all, would you even go up there if there was a hurricane heading into the Chesapeake, and how would you approach it with the whole area possibly going underwater?
Well, chances are I usually don't chase hurricanes north of Cape Hatteras. First of all, because once they hit that water that's north of Hatteras' latitude and near the coast, the temperature drops like 10 degrees. And the storm has to be moving really fast to maintain its intensity up there. And they just don't have, they unravel pretty fast, even though they're going to still have the low pressure and the wind, some of the wind, but it's not going to be nearly as quality. I'm looking for the quality storms. I prefer chasing the Caribbean myself because you get the much stronger eye wall structure there, or, up to about our latitude here in South Florida. But once they get up to north of 30, 35, I lose interest in chasing them that much. But there's a storm going in that area. It's got to come in at just to the west of that, inlet there, and it has to be at high tide to bring that exceptionally high tide. The chances of a Category 3 or 4 up there are pretty remote. Well,
but then again, with the ocean temperatures rising and the potential of riding up the Gulf Stream, anything's possible.
Oh yeah, it can happen, but it's not something that's as likely of a like a major hit on the Gulf Coast or anything south of Hatteras.
Just as a side note, May 16th, the water temperature off of Virginia Beach last year was 51 degrees, around 50 degrees.
Uh-huh.
Currently, as I talk to you, it's 61.
Yeah, it's 10 degrees.
Yeah.
That is a 10-degree jump, which to me would seem to make a difference of a category at least up here.
Well, we have to see what happens toward the summertime. Depending on if it's windy and upwelling, it doesn't. The water temperatures are controlled mainly by the strength of the winds during the, months on end. That's why one of the reasons the water temperatures are so warm lately, because the trade winds have been a lot weaker than they were, let's say, in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And off Africa right now, it's really above normal, and that's why I think we're going to see a lot of Cape Verde-type storms this year. Last year we didn't see that many of them. They all formed further west. But I think we're going to see a kind of year like where you're going to see the long tracks similar to 04, 96, 95 type of tracks.
Do you expect a lot of recurvatures then?
Yeah.
Okay. That would make sense.
All right, we got you marked down.
You're going to get some that, one or two that are going to miss that trough. So that's the thing you want to be watching for.
That means either you or me, Jim, one of the two.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Come right into you, similar to Andrew, or come up and bother me.
Mm-hmm.
It's pattern shifts. You just got to wait till it happens to know. I mean, right now we don't know anything,
No,
All right, Bill, I'm going to let you go. We've got a couple emails here I want to read out. So,
all right. So
I will see you.
I'll be in touch with you in the coming weeks.
All right, Bill. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right. That's Bill in Virginia Beach. He's coming down here for my June 1st hurricane season kickoff show. And,
okay.
He's coming down.
Sounds like a hurricane nut up there.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what he did for me last year when Hurricane Wilma hit? I was doing my broadcast and had my live cam going and everything, and then the power went out and my generator crapped on me. So I had no way to broadcast, and there were a bunch of people on there hitting it, so he went and did it from Virginia Beach and just played radio and TV for people and stuff, so I appreciate him doing that. So people had something to listen to anyway.
Yeah.
I have an email here from Kevin, and he wanted to know, were you in Hurricane Charlie when it hit land, and also where on the web can we buy any of your videos? Well, I can answer the second part of that. Jim has CycloneJim.com. I have the link on my front page at Hurricane City down in the Storm Chaser, where all the Storm Chasers are listed. Jim is right at the front. Okay, we have another caller here. You want to answer that question about Charlie?
I definitely have Hurricane Charlie. I was in Port Charlotte, and along with all the other landfalling hurricanes of '04.
Is there somebody on the line?
I heard a click.
Yes, I didn't answer it fast enough. See, I have my back sometimes to that light, and I don't see it ringing. So try calling back on that toll-free number. I know you were in Charlie. Now, what do you think about Charlie's winds? All the video I see, it shows 110, 115 mile-an-hour gust. I know Mark Suther's video showed the wind whistling through that underpass he was in. Do you really think that there were sustained Category 4 winds down there at the surface in Charlie?
Some places there were. When you get a storm that's rapidly intensifying like it was, you're going to get spots in it that are going to be that, and other spots, in the eye wall that are going to be a lot less. It just all depends on the thunderstorm cell that you're under at the time that thing comes in, and when the storm is changing so fast. If it had come in a couple hours later, those winds would have been more uniform through that eye wall. But it was coming up from a Cat 2 and like 3 hours or 2 hours before that. Where I was, I saw winds probably gusted 130. But I saw other videos that I know a couple friends of mine that got winds where I saw gusts that easily could exceeded 150.
Man, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
All right.
They were very, very brief.
Okay, we have a caller on the line.
Hey, Jim?
Yes.
This is Darren from Altamont Springs.
Altamont Springs. Thanks for calling in. Go ahead.
I have a question about Hurricane Wilma. My brother lives down in Palm Beach Gardens, which is sort of near where you guys are.
Yeah, I know that.
And he got walloped, he said, a hell of a lot worse from Wilma than either Gene or, I forget the other one that came in. Francis.
Yeah.
Was there something special about Wilma? Because it had to come all the way across the other side of the state before it reached the East Coast.
Oh, it was well, one thing it did, it came through. It was nearly a Category 3 when it reached the East Coast. The one thing I noticed in that storm where I was in Dade and Monroe County, the gusts were real. It had a very intense gustiness to it, where some storms is a little more steady of wind. And it had been a Cat 3 on the West Coast, and it was, but a lot of the damage, my aunt lives in Boynton Beach, and it pretty well did a big number on the condo complex she lives in there. They got pretty close to they got a lot of Gene and Francis up there too, but there was no damage compared to what Wilma brought. It took roofs off of some of the condos and busted out many of the windows from the flying debris in there.
Yeah, my brother lost tiles, all his roof cap tiles, and
that was Wilma. A big problem up there. Yeah, the roof shingles blew everywhere, and they blew out windows. A lot of people didn't prepare for that storm like they should have, because it's late in the season, it's not coming here. That's the attitude. I don't think they're going to see that too much in the next few years.
So even if it comes across the entire state, you should.
Well, one
watch
thing,
out for them.
When it comes in from the southwest, you're getting a southeast wind that's coming off the water on the East Coast.
Yeah.
And you're getting an onshore wind, which is going to be the strongest wind. Plus, you're on the northeast side and gradually come around on the southeast side. You're on the right-hand side of the storm's motion. You're going to get the strongest wind. But that southeast wind is coming off the water, so you're going to get pretty hard. And plus the fact the storm was moving so fast, it had no time to die down. It was a very large storm. The large hurricanes don't die down nearly as fast as small hurricanes do. Small-sized storms.
Would it have been different if it went over something a little more terrainy than the Everglades?
Oh, yeah, and that's another thing. When a hurricane goes over the Everglades, it doesn't know it's over land. It thinks it's over, pretty much thinks it's over water, because the Everglades is mostly water, and it's hot water. That sun beating down on that calm swamp all day, days and days and days in the summer, that water temperature is probably as high, if not higher, than the surrounding sea surface temperatures.
Yeah.
Katrina, when it went across the Glades, it was you watch that thing. The only reason it didn't develop faster, it was in a slightly sheared environment on the north side, but it was held intact all the way across because it was going right across the Everglades. Yeah, don't think a storm coming up from the southwest through Palm Beach or something like that. It's very, very little effect from the land. Anything it would affect it would be environmental conditions like dry air or shear or something like that. And plus, and that was another thing. The storm was moving fast and it kept up with the shear, so it didn't, really pretty much stayed with the flow. So it intensified, and as it approached the coast. So that's every storm's different. One may do a lot of damage, this equal storm, and it goes over you another next year, and think, oh, this one's a lot worse than that one was. But it just depends on
it almost seems luck of the draw. Did you get stuck in one of the gust parts of the wall or something?
That has a lot to do with it. You might have got that strongest band or that strongest cell in that band that went across his house.
Yeah, that affected us up here with Charlie, even up in Altamont Springs. Well,
all right. Well,
thanks for the information.
Batting it down.
Yeah.
All right, take care.
Thanks.
All right, that's a caller from Altamont Springs. That's near Orlando somewhere, right?
I think so, yeah. I should know stuff like that. I've been up and down the state so much.
I know. I'm
getting old. I'm forgetting where these places are.
Jim, speaking of Wilma, it drove me nuts about the Hurricane Center and the way they were forecasting this continuously just to be, tropical storm or Category 1 coming into Florida. And, I don't know if you were looking at the GFDL 5 days out. It had it as a Category 3, Category 4 coming in. And, for days, and I started calling people I knew, personal friends, and saying, this is probably going to be worse than what you think. What do you think happened there with NHC?
One of the problems with GFDL, it has its moments sometimes. It had Katrina and Rita both as Category 4s before they left the Keys, and it had Debbie of 2000 coming into Florida Bay, South Biscayne Bay as a Category 4, almost a 5. So, those models can really throw you off.
Yeah, but the GFDL was pretty good last year.
Oh, yeah, it was real good last year after you sit back and look at it overall, but you can't, you can't tell the public, we expect a Category 4 when it's only a 1.
Right.
It's very hard to forecast extremes. I'm sure most of the forecasters were saying, God, this thing's going to be a nasty storm. And they were, the way the preparation was going on, they were, I'm sure that was their thought. This is going to come up here a lot worse than we're saying, but we got to prepare for that.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a lot of things going against it. There was a lot of dry air, strong trough coming in behind it.
Right.
And I was telling friends of mine, I said, if that thing speeds up a lot and aligns itself with that jet that's a subtropical jet across southern U.S., it's going to make that thing either maintain itself or intensify.
Right.
And the same thing with Charlie when it was coming up. It was aligned itself just right with that upper flow. It helped that thing deepen like crazy. If it had moved up to Tampa, it would probably wouldn't have been nearly as strong. But it came in at that perfect angle with that trough.
Right.
And it's hard to forecast those things ahead of time.
All right, we got another caller on.
Yeah,
Hello?
I'm on here.
Oh, okay. Where are you calling from?
Well, actually, Cudjoe Key, down in the Keys.
Oh, you're not far from me, about 50 miles.
That's one thing I wanted to ask you. Where are you at?
Lower Manicumbe, 75.
Oh, I see. Have you been down to that new weather station down on White Street in Key West?
Oh, yeah, several times.
Did you ever see that 2005 summary, storm summary that they have? that video?
I haven't seen that yet, no.
I was down there and I
submitted a bunch of my videos to them. I don't know if they're using any of it or not.
Well, they have a satellite video that shows the entire 2005 storm season, and
I got a copy of that myself.
It's absolutely incredible.
Oh yeah, it's nice to watch that whole thing.
It's just phenomenal. I was really blown away by that.
Yeah. Yeah, I got a copy of the 04-05 season like that.
So is it going to be able to withstand a Cat 5?
Oh, yeah, it should. The building should stay there all right. It's just, I don't know how high the surge is going to get, but they had enough problems down there. I'm sure you, Cudjoe Key, you're probably, are you on the ocean side?
Yeah, and with George, I got a little bit of surge, but with Wilma, it came up and it crossed the, there was 3 feet of water out by the sheriff's station on US 1, but, my house sits 10 feet. 10 feet, so it's...
Caller, are a lot of your neighbors going to stick it out if a major hurricane's coming?
I don't think so.
Yeah, a lot of them said that after George, but then we had too many years in between, and a lot of them stayed. But I think the problem was this storm came in at an angle that nobody had seen before, that's living down here. And they thought, it's not going to cause that trouble. But that's the bad angle to come from, because it did worse than a storm coming from the other way would have been a 4.
Yeah, that was really my question. I just was curious whether either of you two had ever noted a storm that came with the track that Wilma did at that intensity, because the entire Keys were really slammed with surge.
Yeah, well, the 40s we had a lot of them.
Say that, yeah. 40s.
Yeah, the 1940s. That's where we're going. We're into that type of cycle again. I wouldn't be surprised we'll see. Well, Wilma was a little bigger and stronger than most of them, but back then a lot of them came directly over the Keys instead of just to the west. And in Rita, we had a higher tide on the ocean side on Rita, because we had an astronomical tide that was exceptionally high at the time. I don't know if you had it down there the same way, but
not for Rita. No.
Yeah, we had water come right up at my doorstep. Where Wilma came onto the other. I'm on the ocean side, but the Gulf side it came on up to the road, but we were lucked out on that. Never came across.
Jim, how many people do you think? If let's just say a Category 4, because Category 5s are so rare, but let's just say a Category 4 comes in the size of Katrina, right through the right over Key West, right from the east, passes over the lower Keys and into Key West. How many people do you think we could see killed in a hurricane like that?
It's hard to say. I think if a storm like that were to be coming, I think they would be pretty good about getting out of here. Because I've seen these situations over the years where they say, people are just thinking ignore the warning. But when it gets really down to the nitty-gritty like that, I think people are going to start coming out of there in growth. They better get some airplanes down there in Key West Airport when something like that is on the way, and get people out there in Marathon, not depend on the highway.
Now, what if it's a 1935 hurricane where it pops up right near Andros Island and turns into a Cat 5?
Well, that's going to be a real serious problem, because Rita was the closest thing to that. Because if it happened a day sooner, if that thing would have come or a day later and developed the way it did, it would have been equal to that. I don't think people would be ready for that. But luckily, those are very rare events. But like I say, they've got to get some airplanes down into these 2 airports in the Keys and get people out of here, as best they can, because this highway is not going to handle that large number of people going out at once when a storm like that were to come.
What do you guys think about the new emergency manager down there for the Florida Keys?
Well, you mean Billy Wagner's still there.
Yeah, but he's not in charge. Isn't it some woman?
Yeah, he's pretty much running the show, though.
He is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I hope to see it stay that way for quite a while.
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard from William Wagner, Billy's son. That he's not real pleased with that situation down there at all.
No.
So
he needs to stay where he is. I'm sure he's going to retire soon, but.
All right. Well, thanks, caller from Cudjoe Key.
Okay. Well, thank you both.
All right. Take care. All right. That was a caller in the Keys. Here's Darrell Millette in Laplace, Louisiana. Hurricane Katrina went onshore near Burris, Louisiana, and the Mississippi Gulf Coast. What do you think would have happened if she went a few miles west of the original track?
It would have, of course, it would have been worse in New Orleans because they would have got the stronger winds, and the levees would have probably broken sooner, and the tide would have been higher. And as bad as it was, it could have been worse.
I think we would have seen probably 5 times as many people killed.
Oh, yeah.
Because that water would just came up so quick.
It would have come up a lot quicker. They would have had a stronger wind, because the highest winds in New Orleans were probably no more than 90 to 100 miles an hour. If it had come in a few more miles west, it would have been like 120. Because where I was at Slidell, it was a little further up, but we got winds probably gusted to 120 up there. But the New Orleans was actually outside the eye wall. Believe it or not, it was outside the eye wall.
Right. Yeah, it was. Yep. All right, we got another caller here. Okay, go ahead, caller.
Hello, Jim.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, it's Bob Smith from Atlanta. How you doing?
Good,
Okay.
Bob. How are things in Atlanta tonight?
Oh, just doing fine. Weather's perfect. Just doing great. Are you on a time delay?
It's about 20 seconds.
Oh, okay. All right. You were talking later or earlier in the show about looking at decade predictions and things like that.
Right.
And, looking back into the history of things. Have you ever looked at any of the research that's been done into solar activities and over, say, the past 100 years, and looking at cyclical events and driving hurricanes?
I've looked at that. I used to read up about that a lot in the old days, and they would talk about sunspot cycles would, affect hurricane frequency. But I hadn't seen any of that in recent years, and it was really hard to tie anything to that. I'd heard some years you have the light number of sunspots, you get more hurricanes. You get a lot of sunspots, and you get less hurricanes, and then vice versa. Depending on what research you're listening to.
Yeah,
I haven't really gotten anything concrete out of that.
Yeah, and what I've seen, it's all Japanese to me, because I don't see any correlation between a specific storm and a specific flare that has occurred, that there would be any proof that that's what's causing it,
Yeah. I think a lot of scientists over the years have been just grasping at something to try to say, oh, this is going to cause this kind of season, or this, people are just, want to know what they're in for. I think they're willing to grab onto anything like that. Yeah, but I think what Bill Gray's been doing over the last 20 years is probably the best, in hurricane, long-range hurricane forecasting as it's come along.
Yeah, he really has. He seems to nail it as close as anybody can.
Some of his parameters have come and gone, but like the QBO, the quasi-biennial oscillation, I had a hard time believing in that one for many years, because I said, why doesn't it affect the Pacific? And he's kind of he doesn't have that as one of his high parameters as he used to.
Yeah, but tying it together globally, though, I think is the whole outlook. And I think some of the stuff I've read, and I only understand maybe 10% of it as far as the solar research, as far as like a cumulative effect, and when you reach minimum and maximum solar event periods, it's maybe not the necessarily time that a solar flare comes out, and then you have cause and effect or anything like that. But and I've read a couple of research pieces as to over the past 8 years we've been in actually some kind of percentage closer to the sun as far as what happens historically as the apogee and perigee of the whatever the Earth rotating is around the sun, and you have cyclical periods where we do get a little bit more radiational effect from the solar heat, which some scientists are saying maybe that is the explanation for what we would be saying global warming, although I would have to add on the effect that natural causes around the world would also have to add to that. Also is my own opinion.
Well, one thing I've always kind of had a little belief in is when the moon is full or new, how it affects the tides. There are higher tides than during the new and full moon phase, and especially at a perigee when it's closest to the Earth. And I have noticed, and I've watched this with a hurricane forecaster who's long retired, years ago that you noticed the flare-up of the tropical convection around the equatorial zones during that time. And it would appear that hurricanes would be a little, it would push the system over the threshold of a tropical depression or storm or whatever more during that period than it would, let's say, during the first and last quarter. Because it would be a little less effect, because the moon and the sun are pulling on the atmosphere, and the theory is it pulls on a little bit and creates a little lower pressure, just a little subtle thing like that.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
I have a feeling there's a lot we don't know, and I think in the future they're going to really open up a lot of stuff here.
Yeah.
The solar might be a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thank you.
I used to hear about 11-year cycles and solar activity and 20-year cycles. There's so many theories that are out there. But I hadn't heard as many of them as... there's this guy, I think, out of Houston that's really into that.
That's what I've been reading on.
Yeah.
Out of Houston, Texas, and he would the eye model or something like that.
And he would correlate that with the Gulf storms.
Yeah, and I think he's actually predicting greater southeast coast landfall this year. That'll be where the majority of whatever. I think he even has maybe 5 named storms or greater, destructive storms this year.
Interesting.
Well, somebody's going to get it this year. There's no doubt about it. We're in that cycle, and I just hope people are aware of that and are ready for it, because it's going to happen. Because it's just there's no getting around it.
Okay, Bob. Thanks for calling from Atlanta. Take care. Easy. All right. Bye now. Speaking of cycles, you and I talked about this before the show earlier this afternoon, and I have a little different opinion on this, and I think it's from my limited knowledge of decadal and climatological history, these core samples they're taking from the Arctic Circle has showed that the Atlantic thermaline circulation, the big circulation that brings the warm air north and the cool air south.
Yeah, like Bill Gray's talked, it's thermocline.
Right, that's his big thing, the Atlantic thermohaline, however you pronounce thermohaline circulation.
Yeah.
Now the thing is, the core samples show that sometimes there's long periods of cooling and long periods of virtually non-existent. It comes to a stop.
Yeah.
In history, so we are on the slowing down. The Atlantic thermaline circulation slowing down now, and this could be the beginning of a very long cycle. But Dr. Gray never makes any mention of that. He just says this is going to last for 10 or 20 years. But in the event that this is one of these long cycles, which we don't know yet,